by, and I really believe strongly that you have to measure what you do. We've had a really good record-breaking year in 2021. I think Team Kentucky and the leadership of our governor and the leadership of the legislature all collaboratively have allowed us to announce $11 billion in investment, 18,000 full-time jobs being created, and an annual and incentivized wage of $24 an hour. By the way, it's $24 an hour separate from benefits. And if you go back and you look at our track record over the last several years, I feel really good about what that average wage progression has been, and also understanding in 2019, we had 1,000 new pilots that came through UPS. And something tells me they are looking for other new pilots right now as we speak because there's a shortage of them. But nonetheless, we track what the average hourly incentive wage is, and we also not only track it, but we make sure, in my humble opinion, it's compliant and audit ready in terms of how we go about tracking that. And I'll address those things in a moment as well. These how we look at our industries. Food and beverage is a very important part of our industry grouping, automotive obviously, and so we track both by investment as well as the jobs year by year, and we can always provide that information to you as is necessary. What's also important though is by tracking those, it helps us understand which industries to try to be more proactive with, how we're doing relative to our core industries. And our success comes when we can extend beyond the core of our existing companies and make sure that the announcements we bring in of new investments correlate back in supporting our core existing companies and existing employers in the state. This year to date, we've been able to announce almost 8,500 jobs. There's been some 50-plus private sector announcements, about a $4.1 billion investment, and Envision, which was tied to the Ford SK Blue Oval project in some ways, was the second largest economic development project, with Ford SK Blue Oval being the largest in Kentucky's history. This one's a real important, and I'm just going to point out, here's how we have automotive core drivers in the state of Kentucky. And this also goes to why we're in a revolution with electronic vehicles, and we wanted to be out front of that. But more importantly, why? And I think the next slide does a much better job of sharing the visual why. And basically, 1 out of every $11 that comes through the state of Kentucky is tied to the automotive industry. Think about that. 1 out of every 16 jobs is tied to the automotive industry. And we know this transformation's coming with electronic vehicles, and we know there will always be combustible engines in the world, but there's going to be a different mix. And with our state relying so much on that automotive sector, we wanted to make sure that we were out front, which is why so much energy, thankfully, was put into winning these projects. And we're now seeing a lot of deal activity as a result of either existing suppliers changing what they do or new ones coming into the state. Manufacturing base, I'm a core believer that you got to always go to where you came from. And manufacturing is a key driver in the state of Kentucky. And I won't go through all the data points, but it describes in many ways what our mission is and what we do every day to help take care of those core industries, including manufacturing. And if you look at the automotive-related facilities, Toyota, Ford, and the General Motors all drive. I think the types of suppliers we have, there's 550 of them. And if we go to the next slide, what's also important to understand, and I go back to our offices in Europe and in Asia, look at the number of foreign-owned companies employing 113,000 of our neighbors in the state of Kentucky. 515 internationally owned facilities in the state of Kentucky. We're fifth nationally in terms of workers that are employed by those, which is why we invest in having representation in Europe and in Asia, so that just recently, we had Hitachi, a major employer, that had some issues they just want to talk about, all good issues I might point out, but we were able to really coordinate both with their officials in Japan, our officials here, officials in the state, to have a good quick meeting to take care of just making sure we shared some information. If you look at the top announcements in 2021, right up at the very top, look at the number of projects just from Germany, projects from Japan, all other elements. And again, that's why we have not only representatives from those parts of the world representing Kentucky day in and day out. They actually then work with our project leaders and our staff here at the cabinet to coordinate whatever might have been needed for that particular project. And just as importantly, once the announcement was made in 2021, all the kind of follow-up work that we pledged to do, and we'll break that down here in just a moment. Some of the trends, and I've mentioned the EV battery, what's happening. The speed to market's critical for companies today, and I think that's one of the reasons why you all and the governor have built bridges, improved roads, because that kind of an infrastructure base is what our companies depend upon. And cybersecurity, cyber elements are also a big element of what's changing out there. And we think that, again, we have to develop the kind of relationships that also help our people find the workforce they need. And I don't like talking to a company about trying to identify the workforce of today. I also like to say, let's look at over the course of the next 3 and 4 years, how many high school graduates are coming out? How many of them are going on to 2-year colleges? Think about your workforce much more in a continuum process, and I think having the relationships that we can help connect them with our community colleges, with our workforce training agencies to help them find that workforce over a continuum of time is the best way for companies to progress and grow, and those are the kind of things that we do. And the trend is only going to continue where there is a shortage of talented people, and the states that figure it out the quickest will be the ones that find the opportunities necessary to help all of our companies grow. And 2 last things. I'll just tell you that renewables and supply of energy are going to be critical factors. And if you've heard about ESG reporting, that's what publicly traded companies are now doing, required to do, and they're going to be pushing down those same requirements for the environment, for the social well-being, and for governance onto their suppliers. And that will include taking care of the environment. And we have to, as a cabinet, understand that and make sure that our existing programs of at least sharing information about what's changing in that space and how to go about doing it, that our suppliers are ready when the tier ones and the OEMs really start driving down their own requirements under ESG. So those are just some trends that we see out there. You can't sell anything unless you got a product, and it's worth coming here today just to say thanks to the legislature for the funding and support you've provided, building off of basically some pilot projects that were done and providing funding to allow all of our communities to look at ways of creating product, which is where can companies go, where can they grow, and also what's unique to their own strengths as a community. I actually will tell you an industrial park in one part of the state may be more of a commercial park in another. There are lots of different ways that our communities, I think, can adapt, and this $100 million program is going to go a long way in helping all of our communities either regionally collaborate or coming together with who they've collaborated with and finding the new tools to help allow us as a state to bring in not only new companies, but allow many of our existing companies a place to grow right here in the state of Kentucky. How do we help? We've got incentives. We've got to have sites ready. We've got to have knowledge about workforce. There's a whole set of things that we have to do anytime we work with an existing company, a new company, or even a startup company. And I want to point out that one of the real strengths that I think we have that we don't talk about all that often, but the truth is we've got regional hubs for innovation. We have an ecosystem in which the cabinet really helps drive and helps guide in terms of partnering with groups that are all built around both innovation, startup, entrepreneurialism, and we work with our universities and all of these elements, and also we're able to leverage access to federal funds, which I'll mention here in a moment, that allow us to basically be involved in these areas. And back to collaboration, we work very closely with all of our community colleges, all of our colleges, and all of our universities relative to key drivers in technology, key drivers in innovation. And as much as we're possible, we want to make sure we connect, again, all the dots to all of those existing companies that would be out there. And then we work on tracking and going after federal funding, whether it's the National Institutes of Health, whether it's the National Science Foundation, you name it. We've got various vehicles, and our team is a great coordinator, and in some cases helps be the architect behind, helps write those grants, helps work with all of the various partners to then go in and submit the funding requests that right now we have several in with the federal government to access those funds. And the Kentucky Enterprise Fund and the Commonwealth Seed Capital Fund are tools that we have. Most clearly are dollars that are available for these specific areas of growth. In some cases, we partner with those that are out there doing it every day, but in all cases, we're directly involved, providing the governance, providing the oversight, and also making sure that once dollars are either expended or tax credits provided, that they comply in the right way going forward. I have my own philosophical view of incentives. They just happen to be the things that you have to have. And truthfully, you need to have the kinds of tools that the legislature has provided us so that we can show we have capacity. Many, many companies, and I used to be with a company for about 18 years doing the very same thing. When we would look to where to make an investment, sometimes we never contacted the state. We did our own due diligence to find out what tools they had, and if they didn't have capacity or they didn't have a fast-track methodology of providing incentives, we took them off the list because for many businesses, when you go public about a potential project, your competitors go out and try to beat you up every day, and they change the game because they know you're increasing your capacity. And every day in that kind of an arena costs that company money, which is why you have to have the tools, you have to have the capacity to be able to deliver on what you say you're going to do. And we also know that all 50 states, and candidly, again, in my previous life, every country around the world has gotten in the direct game of incentivizing companies where they locate in a scaled up way that's quite remarkable. The key for us, I think, in Kentucky is let's not go dollar for dollar. Let's just be smart and make sure we can be competitive, and I think we have been doing that. I won't go through all the various tools that we have available. I will tell you that most of them are performance-based. In other words, if you're entering into an agreement, and we make sure everybody enters into an agreement, shared responsibility, and you want those shared opportunities of an incentive, you basically earn your way. So if you make the investments and you create the corporate tax liability in the state, that's where you get an incentive. If you actually create the jobs, then the tie back to that wage and that wage credit or taxes paid to the state of Kentucky is where you get your incentive. Some states have upfront programs where they put a lot of cash on the front end. Now we want to see more cash on the front end, and I come back and say, what a great tool that we have. When you earn it, you get it, and you can basically annuitize it and you can monetize it, but you have to be the one that's going to deliver on what you say you're going to do. That's really how these programs work, and I won't go through all the details for sake of time here today. Same thing, we have programs and tools for innovation activities. I think this is even more important going forward. You know, some of the companies we're meeting and working with relative to who want to supply the electronic vehicle would have been startup ventures not that long ago. Or we've got some that are working with the National Science Foundation that are in effect startups, but unlike the typical startup, they actually have proven out and have the government at the federal level behind some of their new technologies that have been proven to be beneficial, and we want them in our state of Kentucky for sure. Cash programs are all performance-based, and I'll go back with their loans and grants, and we do, I think, an excellent job of requiring compliance, and I'll get to that here right now, which is, I'll finish this up, according to Katie. Again, we also have those tools and innovation for entrepreneurs and startups and investors. Next tool, please. And we also have a workforce skill development program that you all help provide the funding, and that funding helps us work with companies to design or custom design an element of a training system that may not be readily provided by the community college or the technical school. This almost in some respects fills in the gap, or in some instances allows the company to design some things around training that just do not exist, or perhaps even do some training of their trainers. The company may be in Japan, the company may be in Belgium. How do we take some of their own people, get them trained, and then train the Kentuckians who are going to work for them? That's the beauty of this particular program, and again, it is performance-based and monitored very, very closely. And our process is pretty straightforward. We get calls from prospects all the time. They want information, they need information. And it's amazing the kind of stuff that they can ask, but we provide that. And ultimately, we get to the point with an application, we negotiate an agreement, then you come out with an announcement. Now the work really does begin, because you got to make sure that you do all the things that we said, get the project scoped out, built out, get people hired, and then make sure that the things that that company said they were going to do, they do, and it can be for 20 years that we're monitoring some of those agreements. And I like to say that compliance really matters at the cabinet. About 15 to 18% of our team is actually built around compliance, and I'm proud of it. And these are just the number of projects that we do from a compliance perspective to make sure, did you create the wages you said? Did you make the investment that you said you were going to do? Do we do the tracking and look at the invoices and the submittals to make sure they all tick and tie back like they should? And ultimately, we do this, and then we get audited by an outside auditing firm, and we always get exceptional reports, and that the team we have at the cabinet really does do an outstanding job compliance. And so I just want you to know, sometimes some of those guidelines come from the legislature. Sometimes they're the ones that we create. either way, I welcome compliance. I welcome the kind of things that we do to make sure when somebody says they're going to do something, they really shared in that responsibility to have earned that shared opportunity. It's an eye candy chart. I can barely see it, but basically what this will tell you is, just as a particular example, we monitor the average wage. So if an announcement comes out and the wage before benefits is pledged, we track to make sure they've done it. I'm very proud to say that they are exceeding what they said, even going back to 2010. And then we actually have what's basically an approved maximum of credits that they can get for their project. We then monitor in terms of what they actually receive, and in some cases, we knock them down a little bit because they haven't delivered on some of those performance criteria. And so this is another element of how we track on an ongoing, regular basis every project, every initiative that's out there. On the horizon, we are also looking at some pretty significant SSBIC funds and some other state programs on the federal level to help small businesses. We thank the legislature, and I think, again, providing some support to our neighbors in Western Kentucky hit by the tornado is a really important product that we're going to be rolling out. And also I mentioned the $100 million for the product development initiative. Those are the kind of things that are on the horizon that we're taking this year and making sure get implemented properly. Source of funding, and I'm almost done, so hopefully I've gone through it quickly enough. It would be difficult to look at our budget year in and year out and look at a trend line. But what you can do is look at our budget and realize I think we have a great working relationship with the legislature. You know, as an example, in 2023, our general fund's about $285 million. We've got restricted funds that include dollars that come through other programs or dollars that come through relative to some of the programs that we operate. And the total budget is about $313 million. But to put it into perspective for you, I would say that the total annualized operating budget is about $32 million. And in this particular year, we've got some big line items that are in there, either in the form of, I think there's 18 line item grants that came through the legislature that we're administering, or it's the $100 million for the mega site program. It's things like that that really get back up to that $281 million that are the non-recurring line items. And we accept them. And by the way, the same rigor around compliance on all of those dollars are going to be followed, both on the front end on the agreement and on the tail end of actual execution and implementation going forward. Staffing. When I was here in the cabinet 210 years ago, whatever it was, we had about 135 people. I liked the size of the cabinet. And let me tell you, with 65 folks, we actually are budgeted for up to 85. I think having a small team and having a real values-driven approach to our management and guidelines, it actually allows us all to not be in silos. I mean, there is not a single thing in our cabinet that these two ladies don't work on, the same thing for all of our people. And I actually think it's that level of commitment that our team has to getting the job done right that's actually an efficiency as much as anything. So I'm saying that we aren't as big as we used to be, but I think we are leaner and mightier than we ever could have been. So that's the size of our organization. Except for one person at the top left-hand corner, it is a fine-looking staff that I will just tell you, enjoy working with. I'm also very proud of our diversity, and I think that's an important element of who we are. And if I were to count up all the years of experience, we got folks that have been with us 40 years, and we've got some folks that have been with us for just a few hours. And I can tell you to the T, because I spent my first several weeks meeting with every team member. They are dedicated to the state of Kentucky. They have great respect for all facets of government, but most importantly, they have a real desire to help create jobs for their neighbors, because they know creating those jobs and helping neighbors get those jobs is really how neighbors help one another and help create communities. And that's really who we are in Kentucky, is one big community of people helping each other.
Mr. Secretary, you are right on time. Perfect. I could tell you spent a lot of years in government relations and communications.
No, sir, I just knew that with you here, if I came in and said 10 to 15 minutes, I better deliver on what I told you all I was going to do.
No, that's good. And if I'm, in addition to being formally with the cabinet, you graduated from UK Ag School, am I correct there?
Yes, sir. I grew up on a farm here in Frankfort. I like to tell people there was a distillery just across the fence, and my dad sent me the tobacco patch when I was 9. And I did have some family that didn't have racehorses, but they had horses. And I did marry a beautiful girl from Bowling Green. So I did all the right things to say I'm from Kentucky.
You did indeed. And worked for Brown & Williamson Tobacco for a stint, I understand.
Yes, sir. I worked for U.S. Senator Wendell Ford for about 6 or 7 years. Worked for the Burley Co-op when I first got out of college as a bookkeeper. And then started doing export sales. Went to work for the senator. Then went to work for Brown & Williamson, where I did international trade work primarily, as well as government relations. And then I came to work for the cabinet under the Wilkinson and a year under the Jones administration. Then I went to Michigan, did economic development in a privately funded economic development organization. And then for the last 18 years, I've been on the executive committee at Whirlpool Corporation, reporting to the chairman with a fairly broad portfolio of responsibilities.
Great, very, very good. Other than not updating your LinkedIn account recently, you've done a great job. So,
my staff made me go on LinkedIn. I'm not a big believer in that. So, yeah, I'm going to go back and probably just get it taken down.
Well, very good. And I'm going to throw it open to questions. And members, just signal Mr. Carter here if you have a question. But, Mr. Secretary, I will say that it's valuable for this, particularly for you, because as you see changes that you want to make, it's good to have this information out among the legislature, because ultimately it'll be in the form of a reorg bill, and you'll have a leg up in terms of your case for a reorg if you so choose.
Well, and my philosophy is transparency is a must, especially with our partners, and to be a super collaborator, you got to earn that trust, and that comes from being transparent. So I welcome that opportunity.
Very good. And first question is by Senator Westerfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If it's all right, if time permits, I've got a couple here.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. And you don't need to come back to me for one follow-up, but if you...
Thank you. If I start talking too much, just shut me up. I asked this of Department of Local Government. What are the impediments to doing your job? What's in your way?
Again, I'll caveat, and I'll invite Katie and Angelica to chime in.
Right, any of your team.
But I can give you some observations, and give you observations that I think are impediments for any successful economic development transaction. First is, you do have to have a team, and a team that understands what it is that they're doing, but you also have to have a team that's not afraid to fail. And so an impediment would be if we didn't have, and we weren't in a position where we could attract the kind of talent that we have attracted, to really be energetic, be inquisitive, and also not be afraid to go out and take a wee bit of risk, albeit an intelligent risk, because you don't win and you don't engage in economic development without being able to do that. The second area, and I actually believe we're in a really good spot, whenever we have new programs, whenever we have the tools that are there, I believe if you can keep them simple and be crystal clear as to what's the expectation and how do they operate, that makes us more efficient and more effective working with the private sector company. The largest and most important impediment that we have in our task, and I haven't found that to be an issue at all in Kentucky. I found it in Michigan from time to time, and I was vice chairman of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation for the last 14 years, I believe, or 12 years. Certainty. Companies and businesses, whatever size, need certainty, and they need to understand, even if they don't agree with certain things, what's the rules, what's the nature of what we have to do, be crystal clear with us. And I think the Cabinet's really done a nice job of trying to anticipate all the issues businesses need. But I think going forward, we're all going to have to roll up our sleeves, and we're all going to have to figure out this workforce issue, and there's no easy magical solution. It's going to take multiple magical solutions, integrating it, and everybody working together. And I believe some of the learnings we're going to get from some of the projects we announced will help us find ways of reinventing the workforce. And it's not a matter of, and we did this at Whirlpool, it's not a matter of going out and saying, well, let's just provide this training so that somebody can work on the third shift and be a press operator. It's really about understanding what that individual wants to do and engaging with them. And that's one of the reasons why robotics is going to play a critical role. It's not going to change the number of people needed to work in the facilities. It's going to change the way in which people work. And I think we're going to have to understand what that future looks like and make sure that we have the training programs, the coordination, the collaboration, and the innovation in those tools to really help our businesses make change and to help us identify where those jobs are and connect people to those jobs.
Okay, I'm going to cut my list down to 2 more questions. I've got a couple others.
Get
but
back
I'm-
in the queue. No problem.
I'll just submit them separately. Because truth be told, Chairman, there's a couple of my questions here that aren't about efficiency so much as they are about economic development, and I've never had the benefit of being on that committee. And so I'm not going to tie up
Feel
your
free.
time with those or our guests' time. But here are the other 2. What does your IT infrastructure look like, and are there any issues or problems that you have with that within the cabinet?
I know we've done a good job integrating those systems, but I'm going to point to Katie to give you a better answer because she is our deputy secretary and she's on top of all the different systems that we have.
So we know there's more than one system now. I'm hearing
But
plural.
we've integrated.
No, okay. He's referring back to, yes, at one point we had 3 different systems. One was for new business, one was for existing businesses, and one was our financial incentives database. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we consolidated all of those into one system, and so we are currently using a platform through Salesforce.
Okay.
And so all of us, and so we said, we were entering sometimes same companies in
It's
2 or 3
Salesforce, but you all have custom tailored it to.
That is correct. We have a
Okay.
Salesforce organization or application. I'm not all up on all the correct technology terms, but we do have a Salesforce instance that everyone in our cabinet utilizes.
Is COT in that relationship at all, or is it just with the cabinet and Salesforce through some agreement?
We have licenses with Salesforce, and then
Right.
there are times where we might be able to bring in. We have 2 developers on staff, and then if we need more, we can reach out to COT and ask them for assistance.
Okay. Anything long-term IT wise that's an issue for you all, or is that you've certainly combined those databases and systems into one? Any complaints there? Any issues there?
No, and the other thing that I will point out, that's for our kind of internal tracking, and we do have a Select Kentucky website, and we license that out through GIS Planning, I believe is the entity. It's called Zoom Prospector, and that's where we list all of our available sites and buildings. So if you go to Select Kentucky, I think it's .ky.gov, and then you can see, you can do searches for different communities, different size buildings, and that we actually previously had COT build that and customize that for us, and then I want to say about 3 years ago, we went and started using GIS planning and Zoom Prospector because that's what they do on a daily basis, is keep a lot of that updated for the searches for buildings and inventory.
The last question I have that is on my mind in terms of the efficiency of the cabinet. On slide 22, you mentioned the enterprise fund and the Commonwealth Seed Capital Fund. And then 23, and in subsequent slides, or not 23, but in subsequent slides, you make reference to a big long list of cash programs. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been here 9 years. I can't remember all the acronyms for all the funds and pools that you draw from, and I don't know the difference between them. Commonwealth Seed Capital, I'm familiar with because of the snafus in the last 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years. That's about it. I don't know what the distinction is between those funds, how you decide to use one versus another versus something else, or if some of them are pre-business, obviously, and some of them might be for existing businesses, but I don't know. And on your compliance slide, you've got hundreds of companies in a couple of these pots. I guess I'd like to know more about what the heck they all are and how they differ from one another, and I guess how much money's in each pot.
I think it's not only a fair question, but we could come back and provide that. Some of those programs, by the way, have either sunsetted, but
No,
they still.
Secretary, I want you 6 weeks in to give me all of that off the top of your head right now.
I can give you most of them. And let me just kind of, regardless of the acronym, what's good about the Kentucky incentives and the simplicity in which they operate, and almost think of it in this bucket. Creating a corporate tax liability, even at the LLC level or at the C level, is one tool. So that is a credit back, and it's actually a very measured way in terms of we want to understand the investments you're making, the hurdles you're experiencing, maybe even the technology you've got to bring in to make that business decision operational, and we'll look at how do we help provide some of that corporate tax liability you're creating because it's not currently on the books because they're not here doing that type of business. And so we'll use that as a tool. There is another tool that can be used basically if your investment in the process and getting everything started and even doing some of the startup training is so large that we know that even with your corporate tax liability being rebated for a defined period of time for very specific purposes, that's not enough. And so then we can say, okay, you're going to create jobs. Of those new jobs, that wage credit, that Kentucky income tax that's paid to the employee, that's tied back again to the decision criteria, the investment criteria it takes to come in and operate in the state of Kentucky, or you're an existing business creating new jobs, making that investment, we can abate either a portion of the incremental state income tax or the incremental wage credit that's being credited for the individual employees you have working for you. And in some variation, even some of the various vernaculars that are there, and there's a lot of them, tie back to that same overarching premise. And so even when we make the offer of using those two tools that have sometimes a little different variation in name depending upon the kind of industry, the kind of company, everything is tied back to a pretty detailed analysis. What's the company investing in? What are the options? What are the costs? What's the payback to the state? And why is it so important that this be done? And but for our use of these tools, do we have a belief that this would not occur? And so that's in the quickest way I can share with you how this is done. That basic fundamental element is there. Now, there's another pool of interesting acronyms where there's some revolving funds that get repurposed and reused that have a differing name in which they become working for companies, but they all have, in some respects, that same principle of whatever is provided, we need to see the payback, we need to see the rationale behind it, and we need to understand. You probably wouldn't, as a business owner, existing company, entrepreneur, or a company coming here, we truly believe that if not for these benefits and tools, we would not get that type of an investment and growth in the state.
Thank you, Mr.
That's at a
Secretary.
high
Wait,
level.
what
Thank you,
we started last meeting, which was only 3 weeks ago, on local government, and we have a lot of follow-ups with them, and they just didn't have time to come back to us today, which was the original plan. There will be coming back, so there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to provide us additional information.
We look forward to it.
And that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Chairman.
We have another question from Representative Minter, but I want to ask one quick question, and that is on about one of the programs. You said there is a minimum amount of salary, $12.51, to qualify for an incentive. And it just occurred to me that seems awfully low in these days and times of 8 and 10% inflation, and was wondering, is that a self-imposed, or is that one of your boards that you'll have to go back to change that? And I apologize for not coming up with the question. Yeah, it's Bluegrass Skills on page 23.
So the Bluegrass State Skills Corporation follows the same, they use the same minimum wage that's outlined in the Kentucky Business Investment, or KBI program. And so those minimums are statutorily defined. We have two kind of community or areas of Kentucky. One we call enhanced. Those are the more economically distressed areas. And then we kind of refer to the other ones as other. If you're enhanced, the minimum wage is around 9-something. It's 125% of the federal minimum wage, and that's statutorily defined. And then the total hourly compensation is 115% of that wage. So it's like $9 and something, and then $10 and something is and then for the other, I think the minimum is 150% of the federal minimum wage, and that's truly statutorily defined. And if you take 115% of that to get to the total hourly compensation, that's your $12.51.
Perfect. Thank you for explaining that. Representative Minter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here today. First, I'd like to commend you as the representative from Bowling Green on finding a spouse who's from the best city in the state. So congratulations on that. And I'd like to thank you all for the amazing work that the cabinet has done to bring in some amazing industries and well-paying jobs to my district. I mean, just the other day, I ran into some people who had just moved to Kentucky from out of state, and they were going to Crown Cork and Seal. That's the first groundbreaking I ever did as a representative. And we just can't thank you all enough for all that work you've done. I have two questions, Mr. Chair. They'll be
Please.
brief. Since part of the purpose of this committee is to talk about possible reorg bills and what those would look like, let's talk about those incentive programs for a second, the ones that are on slide 24. You bring with you experience from Michigan and experience in private industry. If something was to be revised statutorily, what would you suggest, based on your experience, that it look like?
Thank you, Katie. I feel like I don't have enough of the grinding out and talking and working with some companies here to be able to come back and say, here's some areas and some things that I'd like to see changed. What I know about how these provisions work, Representative Mentor, and knowing how they also can be applied, I really like the simplicity of them. They're effective and they're efficient, and in many ways, it doesn't get so complicated that we have to have, all of Angelica's time to write the first page of the agreement. Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to avoid your question at all. I actually think that this is one of the real strengths that we have here in Kentucky is really good, well-defined tools that are pretty straightforward, that do what they need to do. Now, the area that if you had asked me a year ago that I think needed to be done, I got to give the legislature a lot of credit. There is a pool of money that can now be used and held in reserve for mega projects. And those mega projects, you just never know. And in some cases, may not use them, but you need to have those dollars and resources. And I think that plus the PDI program, thanks to you, the legislature, and the governor, those are two really important changes that make all these other tools even much more effective. And I do want to address Representative Miller's point about, even though there's a statutory guideline about what wages are, we track what the average announced incentivized wage is, because I think that's a big important part of how well did we use these tools. So I will come back, but invite Angelica and Katie if they can think of some ways that, or some areas of how these programs need to be changed, or we might come back and seek some changes.
Great.
So the one thing I do want to add about that wage, yes, there's a minimum, but we also can negotiate. That's why you see those job targets. So we negotiate higher wage targets that they have to achieve. There's a minimum job target as well as 10 statutorily, but we also negotiate a higher job target as well.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that, Katie, because I think that is important. That slide about compliance and all the work that financial services does for our cabinet, it truly makes, on the legal side, the negotiation process and the comfort of making sure that we are really being good stewards of the public funds that you've entrusted us with. That wouldn't be able to happen as easily if it wasn't because we have the type of data that we have. So just a recognition, right, that really you are working with a team at the cabinet that goes in and day out to make sure that we spend the funds wisely, and then that we can use the results from those prior negotiations to negotiate future deals that are good for the state.
We might come back, and again, we'll bring back some ideas, but one of the areas off the top of my head would be there might be some of these programs and even some of these acronyms that have been around quite some time, that if we've had so many good years with a company that they've complied, is there a point in time maybe you start to close out the compliance as opposed to those added, and I'm going to use the word years of almost the perfunctionary, because everything that we can do to allow the team to be more efficient, I think, might be worth it. But I would not propose that unless we had a very well-defined milestone by which you could prove that company has done and will do what they say. So that may be one of the areas we come back and talk to you about.
Yeah. Representative Mentor, do you have another question?
Yeah, quick follow-up. Thank you, and thank you for your thoughtful answer. We look forward to seeing what you come back with as you learn more about what businesses in the Commonwealth need. Let's flip it around and look at it from the workforce piece. I teach at WKU, so I watch people. I mean, we've been talking about brain drain as long as I have taught there. And this is something that the state still struggles with in many ways. Although, again, these wonderful employers we have are keeping some people who have the correct skill sets in our city, in our county, which is fantastic. I mean, we've experienced great growth, but there are plenty of other places that are losing people, and a lot of where you're losing them to in South Central Kentucky is you're losing them to Nashville. And you're losing people under 30 to Nashville, and it's not because they don't have income tax. It's because it's the coolest place in the world to live right now, and it is. It is, it's all the things people like about LA and Atlanta, and it's an hour and 15 minutes down the road, and you still, go back to your mom's if you need to on the weekend. So it's a real challenge. And how do we keep people in the state from the workforce development standpoint? How do we create jobs that they want to be in when we have all of these really cool jobs that, you can do all your work from a coffee shop? How do we compete with those things? And how do we compete on wages, on benefits, and what people talk about, lifestyle? Because that really is important to our educated workforce.
It's a great question, and there's probably no real easy way to solve it. But actually, I'll go back to, I think Kentucky's doing a lot of great things to be competitive. Nashville's Nashville, and it's grown. I've got some friends that moved down there who candidly are thinking about moving back after all these years because cost of living's gone up quite a bit.
Very much so.
But I think one of the areas that we have to do, and we actually do it at the cabinet, our working in high-tech companies, in the startup companies, I mean, I get so geeked up just in my short time here and talking to companies that are in their funded stages of commercialization of cancer drugs. I get really excited when I meet a company that's in the glass coating business and how they, electrify it and work with automobile makers. I actually believe one of our programs going forward in the cabinet is going to be how do we better promote the stories of the new jobs being announced? How do we better create examples and real-life understanding of the really great jobs that we have here, these cutting-edge jobs? And how do we strengthen our relationship with the universities and the university placement offices to understand those jobs and understand how exciting they can be, and including, and I'm just giving a generalization, not picking on any one school or the other, but are the placement officers actually working with those university officials working with existing companies to make sure those job opportunities are there? And for somebody my age to get all excited about some of the companies I've met that are doing business in Kentucky, I believe we can get a 22-year-old or a 25-year-old excited about it. And I'm very pleased that I happen to have a living, breathing son who said he never wanted to leave Kentucky because of the things that he's doing and what he is seeing. And we have to do a better job, I think, marketing it, explaining it, and working with great universities like Western and others to better connect where those jobs are. And then I'm going to also fast forward for those that don't go on to college. When you see the manufacturing of the future, and it's going to be there with Ford SK, it's there with some other companies we've already brought in, you want to actually, no matter what your education, you want to be part of making something in that kind of a cool environment. We have to do a much better job articulating that, and I think our cabinet has to partner up with the other cabinets and the executive branch to do a lot more of that and better job of articulating those opportunities.
Yeah, thanks so much.
No, thank you.
Co-Chairman Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noel, I'm impressed by your resume and the experience that you have and that you're bringing to Kentucky. I guess a quick question initially is, as you take over the cabinet, have you been given the authority to make any needed changes that you see in the cabinet that need to be made to make us more efficient, to implement programs that you've seen, like Representative Mentor was suggesting throughout your career?
Yes, sir. First of all, I got to answer the question two ways. One, I feel very supported. I've worked for some great chairmen and some great elected officials. I'm very pleased with my relationship with the governor and everything he has said and shared, and I've had some interaction with the partnership board leaders. I think to the T, they've been very clear what I need to do. They've also been very clear, you do what you feel like you need to do and we will fully support you. So I feel empowered that if I see changes in areas I need to make changes, I'm going to do it. Also, back to being a super collaborator, there are actually guidelines by which, in my capacity and in our cabinet, we have to follow those guidelines, which includes the legislature, it includes obviously the partnership board, includes informing the governor. That's statutory.
Right.
But also, I'm wired in such a way that collaboration means I don't care if it's statutory or not. I believe in really good communications and sharing and explaining to people where we are. And if I earn the trust of all of you and of all those that I'm working with, I believe you'll trust me when I come forward with, I think here's some areas, albeit it may seem like a big change, but here's the rationale behind it. There will be that trust to get it done. And I'll follow the guidelines, but I'm following those guidelines primarily because super collaborator and shared responsibility mean everything to me. And I don't care where it's written what you shall do. I'm a big believer this is what I must do in order to earn your trust and keep it.
Very good. I've got a couple other. Is there?
Okay, yeah, please.
Let me ask two more, and I'll go back in the queue. We heard just a little bit about the incentive programs that are offered. How often, and you talked about the monitoring, the compliance, and everything, and I'm impressed that you track those out, and I saw it in the slide deck. How often do you actually you're monitoring compliance to the T, kind of on paper, are they complying with this? But as far as an effectiveness, measuring the effectiveness of your programs, do y'all review that annually, every 2 or 3 years, or how much review goes into your incentives and programs that you have currently offered? Are they constantly being reviewed, or?
I'll let Katie answer it, but I can tell you in my 5 to 6 weeks, we talked about them every day. We talk about how well they stack up. We talk about what did we learn from some of the ones we didn't get based upon other state programs and more national programs. So there is, or at least there will be under my tenure, constant review, constant understanding, and more than likely, at least in every other year, formal review of how our tools look and how they are compared to others. But I can't answer what's been done in the past.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, we are continuously reviewing them and identifying throughout the year any kind of improvements, any ways that if we're having issues with companies, there are companies are having issues complying, and we bring those changes back every year. So, for example, in 2021 session, we updated all of our major programs to align all of the eligible industries. We had some programs that have different eligibility industries, and we said we wanted to align all of the same for our KBI, our KIA, our KRA, and our BSSC. We aligned all of the eligible industries, and then also we included the big thing that year was remote employees. So we wanted to go ahead and get ahead. So we try to also observe what's going on competitively with our competitors and across the United States and other states with incentives, and we also try to stay ahead of that as well and try to come and recommend changes. We also have recommended when programs are not really working, and we've asked to sunset those, and sometimes for example, there was the Incentives for Energy Independence Act. The structure of it wasn't very flexible or favorable, so we shifted the eligible companies to our KBI program, and we sunsetted that to make it more flexible for those projects.
Do you have another? No, good. Okay. One thing I wanted to ask is on, it relates to slides 15 and others, about you did a deal with a Russian company. Wanted to find out, are they complying with your requirements in terms of compliance? How's the relationship changed in the last 3 months, 4 months?
So this is CSE, right? Commonwealth Seed Capital is the entity that made the investment into this company. We are constitutionally prohibited from holding interest in a company, right? The state is. So that's why we have these other vehicles, right, for that type of investment. CSE is an independent nonprofit, and they are, of course, the ones that made this direct investment. I can tell you, and right now the only thing I can tell you is that there are confidential negotiations taking place, or at least that is our understanding, between CSC and this particular company that you mentioned. But again, there is a little bit of a separation there. Not a little bit, there is a separation, right, between Commonwealth State Capital and us.
Okay.
If
No,
you
I
have any
understand
other questions,
confidentiality,
yes.
yeah.
If you have any other questions, I'm happy to entertain them.
Okay. Representative McCool could not be here, and I did want to ask a question for him about page 7, and that is about the source of people. 18,138 new jobs announced. I just spent a little time in Floyd County, which he doesn't represent Floyd County, but he's in that neck of the woods. A lot of challenges in eastern Kentucky. What are you able to do? Because you just can't announce a job available unless there's a workforce there to fill it that can show up for work and et cetera, et cetera. Could you comment on that on Representative McCool's behalf?
Yeah, I'm trying to basically understand the exact element of what he's looking for, but I'll try to address it this way. First of all, I'm in the process of working with all the ad districts to get out into the state 1 day a week through the ads, so I can do it regionally, get out into all the areas. I've been in every county in Kentucky multiple times, but it's been a while. I go in with the assumption there is a good workforce in Floyd County. I'm also going to go in with the assumption that if there are areas where we have to work harder, let's go find out what's being done and where are some of the gaps and things that we need to work on to be able to do that. And also one of the reasons I want to go through the area development districts is, I grew up technically in Peaks Mill, and I still view Peaks Mill as my home. It's a part of the county. I truly believe the future is we have to get a lot of our counties and communities to coordinate, cooperate, and almost think of an ecosystem that works for them, both in terms of attracting and growing employment and helping their people get employed. And that ecosystem has to have a little bit broader element, in terms of where the employees are going to commute and how they want to commute. And so it's that type of understanding. That's why I'm going out in the state in an organized way, through a regional way, to understand where we can either espouse more opportunities, tweak our tools, help create new collaborations so that every Kentuckian gets an opportunity for employment. There are just some things that companies will define that they need, whether it's certain types of land, certain types of access to an airport, certain types of access, you name it. Our job is to make sure that we ask them to at least consider all of our communities in Kentucky and to help us, or should I say allow us, to let them understand why, and I mean this from my own heart. I can't think of a single community in Kentucky that wouldn't be a great place for a company to locate, and I want to help share why I believe that to be the case. Then the company makes their decision. We try very hard to help make sure the entire state is benefiting. Ultimately, we don't make the decisions where to make the investments, but we are prone, and we will try to do everything we can to make sure that every site and every location is given both a fair shake, but also the best opportunity in presenting themselves for that consideration. And I think that approach of this product development initiative is helping a lot of communities think a little differently about how do they want to present themselves 5 years from now. And I'm hoping that when we get those applications, we're going to see a lot of communities like Floyd County and others participating either regionally or in something unique that makes their community really stand out. I don't know if that answered it.
Again, he had a family emergency and
Okay.
wanted to give him a shout out and ask a question I think he might have asked.
And if it's not, if I didn't answer correctly, I'm sure.
No,
you could get in touch with
that's
me.
fine, and we'll have another opportunity, I'm sure. Another question I had is, and it relates to, it's mentioned, the types of programs are mentioned not only on slide 24, but also on slide 30, and that is, are all of these cash programs grants, or are they forgivable loans, or could you describe just in general a lot of the programs? Are there any in there? Are there any loan forgiveness type programs? What's the share that are just flat grants and et cetera?
I certainly don't know the percentages, but there's a little bit of all those elements. But even a forgivable loan or a cash grant, if that's how it's defined, has performance criteria and thresholds and milestones that have to be met for any type of benefit to be received. And in most of those, it also includes the company hitting a threshold of how much they've already spent, the investments that they've made, and the folks that they are either currently hiring or what they're doing in order to get them hired. But I don't have the percentages of which is which, but we can certainly come back to you on that.
Okay.
And I do, the slide 24 and 25 are all tax incentive programs. So those are tax credits, not cash. 26, you have the cash programs. The first one, KEDFA loans, they're typically loans. Those are truly, really regularly just a loan that's repaid. Now there is the University of Louisville Medical Center, if you all remember that loan, that's in that loan as well. So there is some forgiveness involved with that loan. And that's the KEDFA loan program is what is the unique tool that will potentially be used for the $2 billion projects should they seek application for the forgiveness of those loans. And then Economic Development Fund is a grant, and then you all passed the Rural Hospital Loan Program. That is a loan program that is repaid, and it's revolving loan funds.
Representative Miller, I'm a son of a banker, which makes me genetically wired or an SOB by birth. I don't know which. But, I have, and back when I used to run KIDFA and the programs before, my bent was always loans, or if a loan was forgiven, it was only after every milestone and every criteria was met. And I'm also pretty set in my ways that I think real companies have to have real cash and real people and real leadership before the state does anything. And that's a real mantra, and I believe the Cabinet does an excellent job of identifying companies that have what they need to do to be successful, and we make sure that our dollars are placed strategically and also protect them the best way we can.
Most of the programs on slide 24 are mentioned on, well, I guess all of them mentioned on 24 are listed on slide 30. BSSC, STIC, of which there are 40 programs on a tax incentive, and KAITC are not listed separately. How do you make, would you describe they're all retrospective? You've got to earn an income before you get that tax credit, and then you have to monitor that through the revenue cabinet. Can you talk about that ITC?
The KAITC, it's the Angel Investor Tax Credit Program that is listed on the previous slide.
Okay.
And so under the Angel program, that is for an individual that's planning to invest in a qualified small business, and they have to make that equity investment within 80 days of approval. And then once they do that, then they're eligible for a tax credit on their individual tax return. And then the
STIC.
That's the skills. If you look on the workforce, the Bluegrass State Skills, there's a column that's the Skills Training Investment Credit and a column that's a Grant and Aid program. The Skills Training Investment Credit's a tax credit program. The Grant and Aid's cash reimbursement, but the programs are very, very similar in structure with regards to the training and the eligible reimbursement.
Okay. Great. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions, if that's okay. I'll try to make it brief. Secretary Knoll, thank you very much. The attrition rate through the cabinet is proof that quality over quantity is beneficial. So I commend you on the work that the cabinet does. It does a tremendous job for the Commonwealth. You mentioned ESG earlier. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Where that's going with the cabinet and anything related?
It's an area that I've got to bring some structure around, and I've been talking to a lot of business leaders, utility leaders, university leaders, and others, and just been asking the question. A couple of years ago, even at Whirlpool Corporation, ESG, while we started doing a sustainability report, we did practice ESG. It took on a whole new meaning when the investment community started setting up criteria, and then, as you know, all the third-party measurements around ESG, which is, again, the environment, society, and governance. I'm a big believer, especially in the environment, as companies have made, publicly traded companies have made their net zero commitments in terms of how they propose to reduce the burden on the environment and how they intend over a certain period of time to basically have net zero landfills, net offsets for anything that might go off into the ozone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're making these pledges. But I believe, and I believe we're already seeing it, in order for them to meet those pledges, they have to push down that same kind of compliance onto their suppliers. And those suppliers then have to push it down on their suppliers in order to get what they have to do to get the kind of, tier one or whoever they're selling to. And I worry, so I don't have a program, Representative Baker, I just worry, and I want to put it top of mind in our own state. If that starts to happen in our state, and we have to help some of our longstanding core manufacturers or whomever, they come in one day and say, we actually have to find a way of getting renewable credits, as an example. Or we have to find ways in which our air emissions have been reduced, or as we're using transportation systems, how we've reduced, the net emissions in order for us to continue to do business with some of these larger companies. I want us to be thinking, how do we start preparing for that, and how do we at least have information, or it may require us to pool some of these suppliers together and find out how they can either invest in or be a participant in just complying with their customers. And that's what I meant by, I believe, ESG and the focus on ESG and the way companies are handling it. Ultimately, it's going to be pushed down on all companies. And I don't have a magical answer. I just know it's an area that I feel like we need to be asking and understanding. And I've been very pleased that as early as today, as recently as today, one of the utility companies said, we are thinking about that as well in terms of our services and our renewables. And I've been pleased that a couple of the universities have said we are thinking about that. And again, they don't have the answers, but we know that that's where that collaboration is going to come in. And I don't know if that was exactly what you were looking for, but that's my thinking on it.
That's good. I appreciate that. And, Kentucky ranks high in the cost of doing business and low energy cost. My concern is that this may drag us down in that regard if we're not cautious. And then thinking along the lines of what you were saying with some of those companies and second and third tier suppliers, if they are required to comply with some of those ESG standards, the cost of them doing business and will that come back some on the state? I mean, there are some challenges that lie ahead for us, perhaps, if that continues to grow. The way I see it, am I looking at that correctly?
I think you are, and none of us have a crystal ball, but I think in the role that you all have as elected officials, the role we have is trying to work with our economy and all of our states' employers. Our job is to try and project, try and think, and try to be smart about it and try to get the best information we can. And for every good intended program, sometimes there's unintended consequences, and we have to be aware of that as well. And I just will go back to, I feel really good about Kentucky for a lot of reasons. I also feel really good. There's a lot of good checks and balances that take place in how we govern and how we address and do things. And as long as we stay informed, stay willing to communicate, I'm actually an optimist and say we can deal with these issues, but I don't want to be surprised. And so therefore, I'm not trying to be an alarmist. I'm just trying to create dialogue and conversations about what I think might be out there so that we're ready for it.
Absolutely. It's very helpful. Thank you.
I've incidentally on that same subject have been doing had done some trip planning for a trip to Europe, and I was amazed at the number of websites, travel websites that ESG popped up on in terms of here's the energy impact of this mode of travel versus that mode of travel versus something else, and it's coming. Whether we're ready for it or not, it's coming.
It is, and that's, again, we have a great big announcement with a great big company like the Ford, SK, Blue Oval project. We've got others. We also have to help people understand those are projects that are pioneers in where they're going, and we learn from them. We learn even how they will change and do things with their workforce. With the big three that we have as a state in terms of distribution and our freight hauling companies that are here, they're on the cutting edge. They are out there aware of what's happening, and those are some of the first calls that I have made is to get in to visit with those folks so we can learn from it and understand it. And you're right, it is going to happen. I think we are well positioned with what I call the innovative business and innovative thought leaders in the universities. Our job is to be out front of it and to be aware of it, and that's all we're trying to do with our cabinet's mission.
Thank you. Co-Chairman Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a couple of real quick hitting questions for you that I jotted some notes down from your presentation. You said you were budgeted for 85 people in the cabinet, but you only have 65. Are those some of those positions hard to fill positions, or you're just not filling them out of choice?
One, I think my predecessor may have had a few open roles that he was waiting just to give me some flexibility with some hiring. I think we're like everyone else. We're having, I don't want to use the word challenges, but we want to be very careful that whomever we offer an open role to, we feel very strongly they have the right values, because I really truly believe in our type of work, an individual's got to have the right values. They also have to have be willing to adapt to our culture, and it's got to be an individual that really is a team maker. So we're select, and we're being select coming out of a difficult pool that everybody has a challenge recruiting. I don't care who you are, but we put a little bit more selectivity on ours, because I want everybody who winds up saying yes to come to work for the cabinet to be with us for a long time, but I also want them to bring something unique, but also step in and want to be a part of our team. Katie?
No, I agree 100% with everything you had to say. There are times where we post the position a couple of times until we can truly find the right fit. There are applicants, and we go through interviews, but we want to make sure we truly do find the right fit. And there are times where it's like we get one step forward, and we have some internal, some existing employees that, because of their work and our work with these companies and who we work with, they get taken from us because they get these offers, because they see that we have good employees. And so we do sometimes get one step forward and then take two steps back because we lose staff, which in our eyes is we've helped them move on to better their career and better opportunities, but we do hate to see them go.
And I love to see team, and I'm one of them. If you lose somebody, you need to step in and do that job. And it actually makes us stronger when all of us know how to do each other's job and how to do the jobs for those that report up into us. And that's what I mean by saying sometimes being lean is a good thing, and we are lean. But we have been successful. We have 2 individuals who started with us today, and we've had a couple of project managers who joined us in the last several months, and I'm really ecstatic about they all bring something uniquely different, and this cabinet's not gone out and just homogenize and hired all the same kind of people. And I think that's really one of the hallmarks of our success is it's a diverse, it's inclusive, and I really believe strongly that people should have their own unique set of skills, and they add then to the team component.
I've asked this question our last meeting about working from home, whatever you want to call it. Where are y'all at in your cabinet on splitting up work from home, work at the office? Are you back to pre-pandemic process? And I know that you're kind of a sales force and you're on the road a lot and things of that nature, but government is a service, and I like for folks to, when they call a cabinet, to get a phone call answered and email answered. Where are you at on that?
Basically, we're following the guidelines where individuals, if they so choose, may work remotely 2 days a week. 3 days a week, they're expected to be in the office. And also, my belief is creating a culture where the majority of people want to be in the office. And even as we get those requests for working remotely, we're very smart about it, making sure that we have not just a skeleton team, but a core team to handle things at the office throughout the week. The other thing is, and you mentioned it, we have quite a few people who are on the road a lot, and they're out taking care of clients and working, and that's not working from home. That's just simply doing their job, being out in the state. And candidly, and every role's a little different, but I believe being out in the state and being with the constituencies and being with those that we're collaborating with is most important. But we manage it and do it in a very smart way. And we do have, again, up to 2 days if people really do choose to do it, and we approve it because some jobs don't allow for it. And also, we really expect everyone to be in the office on the same days, or at least 1 day a week, so that we can have our meetings and make sure the culture is where it needs to be. And I'd say right now, a large number of people aren't even asking to work remotely. We have a large number that come into the office now, and I think it's because the culture we've created.
Okay. All right. And just one other question from your comments. You mentioned in your opening comments about what businesses need is certainty, and we're in some very uncertain times right now, and it kind of leads back to the ESG question that Representative Baker asked. As far as Kentucky goes, and we've been known to be energy producers, specifically in fossil fuels, but we've had a lot of solar developments come into the state. Even in my area of the state, we've got somebody looking at wind. I didn't know the wind blew that much in my area, but
That's before they hired me. I'm blowing up some wind. We're bringing solar as an industry.
But I guess my question is that with the whole ESG conversation, I'm a believer that we've got to have a base load of fossil fuels, natural gas, and coal to remain. So there are not any impediments at the cabinet related to ESG that would keep somebody that wants to do a new plant or something that deals with fossil fuels, burning fossil fuels, things of that nature, away from Kentucky. You would not push them away versus a green deal, or is there anything of that nature? Okay.
No, sir. Not one iota. And I'm not espousing there ever be one. I'm simply saying what some of the trends are and things happening. We're trying to balance, but no, there's
Understand
no restriction or anything like that of any nature.
Yeah, I know there's plenty of other restrictions. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't self-imposing those on an industry that we have a lot of natural resources that could make it work in Kentucky.
No, sir. And I'd say back to our culture, I think our role as the cabinet is to help be innovators and problem solvers. And so if there ever was a restriction or something like that, not by us, by another, how do we help figure it out to balance out the right thing for the company, for the community, their people, and the planet as well? And we welcome and we want to work with companies of all sizes and varieties.
And one follow-up question. Senator Westerfield has a question as well. But as far as brownfields and former industrial sites and things of that nature, they're all over the state of Kentucky. Do we have any incentive programs to help with the redevelopment of those sites? And do we target those specific sites? How are we working? How are you all working with those sites?
First of all, we work very closely with all the cabinets, including those that have oversight for the number of brownfield sites in the state, as well as they have some tools and some incentives that can be applied. And I'm very familiar with brownfield, having done a lot of brownfield development both at Whirlpool and even on my own. They can be great tools and great redevelopment opportunities. They are not to be seen as a real problem. And so our job is, and we just met with Secretary Goodwin's team, and we're going to be following up a learning session with our team and their team to know more how we can engage in brownfield redevelopment and take advantage of some of the federal and state tax credit programs that do exist, as I understand it.
Very good. Thank you.
Senator Westerfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does the what percentage of the projects that come through the cabinet originate from the cabinet reaching out, and what percentage of them originate from some other outside group reaching out to the cabinet or the administration or the government at some point?
I'll have to turn to Katie, but I'll give you one factoid I know from a previous life. 75% of all project leads, according to local economic developers, come from local economic developers. 75% of the leads, state folks and others feel like 75% of the leads come from them. The reality is somewhere in between, and I don't know what it is in Kentucky, but it is something that we track and are tracking, as a matter of fact, in terms of trying to be a little bit more granular on where did the lead come from, and we do track that. I just don't have the numbers off the top of my head. That's why I brought these two people.
And I don't have the number. We'll have to get that information for you. But we did start tracking that actually when we created our Salesforce system. Mm-hmm. So we do track where the leads are coming from. It's not just companies now. We've got consultants. There's all kinds of different sources of where the leads can come from.
Senator, I'm working on one now where it came through from a consultant, but in having conversations with the company, they had met another company that is in Kentucky that they had done a project with us, and they said, you really need to go see the folks in Kentucky. And then that company then said to the consultant, even though it shows up, this lead came to us from a consultant.
Sure.
So we're tracking and trying to understand that a lot better, because we also have to be, I think, very proactive in reaching out and making sure we're getting the results from it.
I'd also appreciate, thank you for providing that whenever you provide follow-up information to the committee, but I'd also like to know, I'd like to see, I guess, just a sort of a linear description of the process of a lead to groundbreaking to compliance. I'm curious,
More
Look,
detailed than this one.
other than the Ford announcement, which required legislative input, I won't speak for any of my colleagues. I'm not included, I'm not involved, and I'm not saying that I need to be in the room for all those meetings. I'm normally not involved outside of a broader policy vote, obviously, unless there's a groundbreaking announcement or something. So I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it happens from lead to end, from birth to death for the cabinet and for the projects that you are watching, shepherding, funding, following, whatever. I'd be curious to know what that looks like, regardless of where the lead comes from. I guess I just want to know what that process looks like for you all.
We'll
And
come
if
back
you-
and show some of that. We can articulate. It's every project is a little different, but I
Sure.
think we can show pretty in a little bit more detail how those processes do work.
And I'm not looking for specific project information at all, and it's not what I'm looking for. I don't know how that goes from start to finish, and I've never been involved in that in my professional. I'm an attorney, and I was a prosecutor before I did this, and they don't have anything to do with economic development. In that same process, if in terms of follow-up, it'd be helpful. Maybe there's a map or a graphic like this that already exists. I'd be curious to know where all the projects are the cabinet's done, say over the last 20 years, by year and by geographic location.
So we have an online searchable database on our website that shows all of the incentive projects that have been approved. And I think we kind of had to have a starting point. I think all projects that were active as of 2008. And so you can go out there, you can search by the entire state, you can search by program, you can search by the specific county. And so we can share that with you. So if you're interested
Is it something that are you all not able to produce or show all of that at once? So I don't need to go back and look for each of the 120 counties.
So it's a lot of information. That's the only thing. You can look at 120 counties. So, for example, you can pick in this database a specific incentive and say all the projects, right, that have been incentivized through this particular vehicle, right, through this particular incentive program.
And I'm not
then
interested in
pick
this
for the entire state.
I'm not interested necessarily in I perhaps could be, or maybe members are interested in individual programs, but I'm thinking just globally for the cabinet. What?
Or challenge, yeah.
Here, I'll show you my cards here, ma'am.
Sure, yeah.
Christian County doesn't have a Ford announcement. Neither does Todd, Logan, Caldwell, or Muhlenberg County. And not every county can, and I get that. I understand that. But my assumption is the closer to Jefferson and Fayette and Kenton you might be, the more likely you are to get some attention and to get some of these things. I just wanted to see, out of my curiosity as a rural legislator from a part of the state that hasn't been ignored, I'm not going to say that, but isn't getting that sort of attention. I'm curious to know what that looks like over time. A heat map sort of geographical breakdown of where we're putting our economic development dollars over time. Are we spending it where I assume we're spending it? And at the rate at which I assume we're spending it? Are the heat blooms hotter in urban areas and in Bowling Green? Or is there a good distribution? Or during this gubernatorial administration, right or left, is it favoring this area versus that area? Or is there a focus? I say favor, there could be a valid reason because there needs to be attention here in coal country in the east or the west. That's what I'm looking for. And I appreciate that resource is out there, but putting all that together is going to take more time than I have with the 3 jobs I've got to keep. So,
No, and we understand that we can try to
Take a look at it.
So maybe
come up with
take a look
something.
at it on a
Yeah.
follow-up. That'd be great.
and I didn't expect you to have that today. I was just
And Senator obviously will provide that, and would love to even have the chance to describe the projects, because our job is to make sure that these projects happen in the state of Kentucky. The vast majority of all projects are companies, including even existing companies, that are looking at multiple states, in some cases multiple nationalities, about where to put the project. And so, our job is to make sure we get it in Kentucky. Our job is also to make sure in the process that we try and get them to evaluate multiple other sites, even if they've come in and said point blank, this is where we must be. We try to make sure they understand all the elements in Kentucky, because our job is to sell it. And we would welcome the chance to walk through that process to help maybe just lay out some examples of what the companies were looking for, what was their hot spot, what was driving it, and also what was the workforce issues, because I think that helps us work collaboratively and work with all 120 counties as we do, because since I've been here and for the several years I was in economic development before, it was always to make sure that every county got a fair shake and a fair shot, and that we ultimately won the projects. And I believe that to be the case today, for sure.
Great, thank you. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, Century Aluminum, their Hallsville smelter, they've announced that they will be suspending operations for about 9 to 12 months. And it's going to lay off, I think, 628 people because of the rising energy cost. What are we doing to help them?
There's been outreach, there's been conversations with the company about how can we help, and I don't want to get into some confidential information, but there was even some things I think the company has done that might have made their situation a little bit more challenging. The outreach is there, the willingness, and it's been offered to them to have us come in, roll up our sleeves, and try to figure out, is there a way that we can be helpful to them, and is there a way the company can be sharing with us, how do we do it where we all have to figure out a way to help each other get to that end objective, which is to not have these folks be laid off, and that communications and that outreach has been made.
Well, thank you. Because to Senator Westerfield's point, that's a small area that is largely dependent upon jobs like that. And thinking of, in recent years, we've had aluminum companies, we've had Nucor and different people who are very dependent upon energy. And the rising cost of energy could be very detrimental to those businesses as well as the communities that depend upon them. Going back to the conversation on ESG. So figuring out how we can support those businesses, maintain those jobs, and help those communities is vital.
I can pledge to you that we always do everything we possibly can. There's nothing worse than seeing a layoff take place. Those are our neighbors. And I wish I could say also there was a magic wand that could make all of them easy and that they would stay open. But the key is it's tough work, and we will continue to do that, and we'll continue to share information as we are allowed to by the companies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Baker asked my question because I'm right in around Century. I actually have a Century aluminum smelter in my district, the one that remains open. But it just kind of a follow-up on that. That's the certainty part that we talked about. I mean, I was there literally a year ago at that mill that's closing down with Secretary Ross, and they make military-grade aluminum. A big pride point of Western Kentucky is that mill, and we've got to do everything we can to get them back going. But right now they're losing, hundreds of thousands of dollars a day because of strictly energy costs. So I appreciate the effort that y'all are making. And before I give up the microphone, I need to brag one more time about your staff, and I can't remember her name, that helped with the Pratt paper industry announcement throughout
Brittany?
Brittany, yeah, throughout our area. She has been praised all the time, and she did a great job on that. I know that was pre your time, but that's going to add a substantial amount of spinoff jobs in our area, in my district, and I want to say thank you for that.
Brittany does a great job, as do all of the project leads, as does everybody in the cabinet. And I've said I'm giddy about the quality of the team. It's a great team.
Mr. Secretary, we don't really have a time schedule, but I want to honor your commitment. But I do have a few more questions. One is on slide 29 about the process, the standard process, and you talked earlier about the leads, and I presume they either come from a company's group, business development group, or they come from a consultant's that does that sort of thing.
Or they come from us. I mean, we were at Select USA in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago. We met, my goodness, probably with 15 companies. And that's actually a huge program where companies, especially international companies, looking to make investments show up. And if your state's there, they will sit down and talk with you specifically about what they're thinking and what they're doing. So there's all kinds of ways. And anybody that's been in business and sales, you can have all the sales strategies you want, but you get woken up one day and you get a surprise. How did that even come to me? But no matter how it comes to us, we try to track it, and we make sure that very quickly we provide the personal service and the personal follow-up, even if it comes from something we've never heard of. But we also have leads that come from people that we know who contact the local community, and they work with us as well.
Yeah. Each administration that comes in, I think they look at those offices in Asia and in Europe that you maintain and say, is that really cost effective to do that? Have you formed an opinion yet in terms of, does it really make sense for us to have offices in Germany and in Japan?
Sometimes a good place to start is looking at other states, and other states have much larger staffs in all of those parts of the world. Some states have even by factor of 4 and 5x the number of offices, so in different parts of the world. So I'd go back to the very easy metric for me, and it was a slide we showed that had the number of companies that are here. I mean, we're the 5th or 6th state per capita in terms of foreign international invested companies, and there's 515 internationally owned facilities. I believe very strongly that having basically very small staffs of about 1 to 1.5 people in each one of those parts of the world. It's a great way of saying to those 515 foreign-owned companies on a fairly regular basis that we appreciate them if they need anything. We think enough of them to have someone closer by to be able to work with if necessary and if needed. And a lot of their work is reaching out to those existing companies. And so at a very high level, I believe they're needed. I look at what other states are doing, and Kentucky by far and away is not compared to comparable in terms of the size, and I don't think we should try to match up with that. I think our job, and this is where I definitely need to do a better job of an evaluation over time, do we have the right processes? Do we have the right cadence in going in and out of there? And do we have the right people that are operating them? But I just look at that chart right there and say, for 3 people in effect to be on the payroll closer to our market, that's 515 customers that are employing 115,000 people.
It's the age-old question: do you want to be more proactive or more reactive? And
we're trying to balance the right one in between there.
The final question I had, and I know that Larry Hayes was acting for a long time. He was the interim for a long time, as I recall. Your position is still not hired by the governor; it's hired by a board, correct?
Correct. The way I understand the statutes, the board sets the criteria, sets the job description, goes out and looks for individuals, and they can recommend out of a pool of 3 to the governor, and the governor chooses from that selection of 3, I believe it is. Or
The board is required by statute to hire a consulting firm to do a nationwide search, and so that did happen. And then they included the board in the interview process. Then they narrowed it down to 3, and they approved a resolution providing 3 names to the governor, and then the governor was able to select a candidate from one of those 3 names. Should the governor, and this has happened before, should the governor not, the governor can decline all of them and say try again. But fortunately,
I met with a lot of different people, not just the governor. I want to be really clear, and including other cabinet secretaries and with Larry. So I don't know what went on behind the scenes. All I know
the
is
ladies
in
they've got a much better perspective on that, so I'd welcome any comments. But if there's any changes in that statute as well, because that's a very critical role. We shouldn't leave it open for an interim for a long, long time. I think that in terms of an organizational issue has tripped up some governors in the past in terms of they thought they could just appoint a CED secretary day one, and they couldn't. And so if there are any changes in that statute, I think we'd like to know about that you feel is necessary.
Well, I know if Larry Hayes were here, it was supposed to be a short stint, and then COVID hit.
It was a factor of COVID.
Yeah, I know Larry well, but
Okay.
I can see that. But anyway, thank you very much. Members, if there are any other questions that we have, any other follow-ups, and we would like to have your follow-ups, and we may send you something in writing to ask, and if it's helpful, we may have you back for 15, 20 minutes just to answer follow-up questions.
Happy to come back, and I know I spoke way too much, but I will close by saying there's a lot of states out there that would love to have had Larry Hayes be their head of economic.
Oh, I know.
development.
I've
He's a
worked with
great,
Larry
great
in
individual,
Metro
and he's
Louisville
made my
for a
job a
time.
lot easier.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for
you.
being here. And members, the next meeting is Monday, August 22nd. And we have not set the target of that meeting, or the subject of that meeting, rather. But we will get that out to you members as soon as we can. So if there are no objection, this meeting stands